Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Hey, you guys, welcome. This is Sandy. We're going to get started in just a minute. We want to do a quick tech check. Um, let's see. Leah, you probably want to see if you have a button where you can show your screen. If you have your.
No one can see. Click start screen. Let's see. No one can see. Click to start screen sharing. I'm clicking, but nothing seems to be happening.
All right, hang on. Let me try this because I bet you logged in with my name, and it's probably confused about who we are. Try it again because I just told it to make you the presenter.
Show my screen. Let's see.
There we go. I just need a few slides now. There we go.
There you go.
Kaboom! All right, so that you guys who are out there, if you can see those slides and you can hear us okay, would you type in the Q&A box and just let us know all is well? Some of you know the drill. Okay, great. Kristen says yes. Candace, hey Candace, welcome. We're glad you're here. Good. Phyllis, hello Miss Phyllis, all is well. All right, awesome. Well, let me say welcome to everybody, but I know we have some new people who joined Project SmartSprout at the Inspired Fundraising Retreat, and I believe Candace was one of those. And we're super glad that you're here. This is going to be awesome today. Joey, I think, as well, also joined. Catherine saying all is well. Thank you. Fantastico. So I'm really excited about this one. I'm going to get myself out of the way and let's get to the good stuff. You all know Leah and Susan, I think, that they are they're our grant team here at Get Fully Funded, but also really well versed in budgets. And I know that having your numbers together is super critical for the success of your organization, for your ability to manage, and also for grant purposes. So without further ado, Leah, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you guys take it away.
Alrighty. Hey everyone. Thanks for joining Susan and me today for our first ever Project SmartSprout Budgets webinar. We have a lot of good stuff in store for you today and lots to go over. So as Sandy mentioned, feel free to use the chat box to ask us any questions as we go along. We might have to have Sandy help field those a little bit.
I can, and let me go ahead and also tell everybody should be a place on your dashboard for handouts. So there's a couple of sample budgets. If you want to grab those, you've got an Excel version and a PDF. So yeah, and I'll keep an eye on the questions for you guys.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, guys, so we're here for you. So please use us and ask every question that you need to. The handouts, as she said, are attached. You don't need them to follow along with the call, but I'll definitely be referencing them later, and I'll be pulling them up on the screen. So are you guys ready to go? I know I am. All right, so having a fully funded budget, a minute, next screen, there we go, it's working for me. Having a fully funded budget is a dream for many small nonprofits. Well, it's actually a dream for all nonprofits, really. I mean, think about what would happen if you had all the money you needed to carry out your plans this year. You know, your bills would get paid on time, every time, right? You might be able to hire a staff person. Maybe you could even expand your programs and minimize your waiting list. You could probably even have some cash tucked away in savings accounts for emergencies or even making plans for the future. So I think that would be awesome, don't you? Having a fully funded budget not only means having the money you need to pay for things and having the ability to raise more money whenever you need it, but it also means having a donor base of people who love your nonprofit's mission and they want to see you succeed. Okay, so doesn't that sound good? Everybody ready? Woohoo! Excited? All right, so what we're going to be covering today, one, are the benefits of budgeting, and you'll see how budgeting can help your nonprofit plan financially and then set you up for success each year. And then two, we'll be stepping you through the basics of the budget process and touch on key terms like fixed and variable costs, direct and indirect costs, and we'll even be diving in a little bit into in-kind. So as we do all of this, we'll be showing you guys real life examples examples that we have from our clients or from our previous employments, and also sharing some tips and tricks with you guys as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it on over to Miss Susan and let her tell you guys all about the benefits of budgeting.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today. This is one of my favorite topics because when we're working with nonprofits that have good budgets, we have such a much better chance of getting grants for them. So it's a real important topic for Leah and I. I love this saying here on this slide: budgeting is the only way to get a grip on your spending and to make sure your money is being used the way you want it to be used. And if you think about it, that applies to personal finances, businesses, and nonprofits. Um, the benefits of budgeting come from having a roadmap of where you're going for the year. There's a strategic plan and an annual plan, which are great for that. But your budget is all part of that, and it's tied into all that. So it's real important to have one. So throughout the year, you can navigate where you're at with revenue and expenses so that you don't get off track. It's a guide so you can plan for the future. So if you monitor your budget throughout the year, you are able to see where you're going. Do you have enough revenue? Do you need to take a step back and raise more money, or do you need to cut back on a program? It shows you where you're at with all your plans for the year. It's also a way to provide accountability for your organization and for your staff. So, when they have to operate their program or make an expenditure approval, it's in the budget and they know ahead of time, and it keeps from things being spent that weren't in the budget or weren't planned for. And so they know where they're at and what they're supposed to be doing based on your budget. It's also critical to, as I mentioned earlier, with grants and any kind of fundraising, because it shows people, that you are responsible and that you have a plan. It shows you're worthy of a donation. It shows that it helps persuade them to give to your organization, invest in it. And you're going to need one if you decide to do a loan, or if you decide to write a grant. You're going to have a budget. So those are just some of the benefits of budgeting. And let's see. Let's go on to the next slide.
Hang tight. I'm clicking the next button, just so you guys know. I promise I am. Aha! There it is.
Yay! Yay! Okay. Believe it or not, you would not believe how many nonprofits that we run across, especially new ones and young ones, that don't have an organizational budget. Two of the common reasons we hear is we don't know what we're going to be doing for the year, so how do we set a budget? The other one is we don't have that much money, so we didn't think we needed one. But if you think about it, how do you know how much you'll need for the year? Or if you need to vamp up your fundraising, or if you need to cut spending if you don't have a budget? So today is an opportunity to stop thinking that way, if you are thinking that way, and to take a step and look at what you can do to develop a budget. And I guarantee you, by the end of this webinar, you're going to see that it's not as hard as you think. You're going to see the benefits of it. If you're on a calendar year, this is the time to start thinking about that. A lot of planning begins about September, the last quarter of the year. People start to think about their budgets for the year. So the budgeting process. This is a really good graph that shows you the process that you go through in simple terms. And we'll be getting into more details on each of these as we go along. The first thing is defining your goals. And of course, this means your big goal, what's your mission. It also means, what do you want to do for the year? How many people do you want to serve? How many animals you want to save? How many houses you want to build? What are the programs and projects that you want to carry out? The next step is you've got to determine your expenses. What is it going to take for you to carry out those goals? And the main thing is that you don't think in generalities with this. You have to think in detail. So you've got to spend some time, if you have to research, how much things cost, like products, how much time is you're going to have in staff time to, and how much you're going to have to pay them to be able to carry out your activities. So that's a lot of the expenses. The income is your next step. So income's going to be things, we'll get into these in more detail as we go along, but they're things like your program income that you earn from your programs, fees like adoption fees if you're an animal welfare shelter. It's things like, how much money you plan to raise from your fundraising, individual donations, events, whatever the case may be, product sales, anything like that. So now you know your goals, you know what it's going to cost you, and you know how much revenue you think you can bring in. So then you may have to look now at reconciling your goals with those issues, because perhaps when you looked at your revenue, it's not enough to meet those expenses that you've lined out. So you're going to have to either back off some expenses, change your goals a little bit. Maybe even you'll have a little more money than you thought, so you can have a few more activities than you thought you could. So you either got to lower your expenses in one case if don't have enough revenue, or if you've got extra revenue, what are you going to do with that? Do you need to save some time and maybe back off some of that, or maybe you put it in a contingency fund? So once you've done all that, then you're ready to have a final budget. And so anyway, we're going to get into some more specifics with all that and get you going on each of those areas. And I'll turn it back over to Leah.
Thank you, Susan. Alrighty, guys, you ready to dig in and talk about the nitty gritty of things? Because I know I am. Because let me tell you, I never used to think that I was a numbers person. But then one day, out of the blue, I realized how much I actually enjoyed budgeting. So, I love crunching numbers. And I find a certain peace in knowing I have money for my bills, I have money to do fun things, and I have money in savings. Okay, all of this helps me sleep at night, because we all want to sleep at night, right? So it helps me sleep at night, and it really gets me excited about life and about doing things. So while it might sound like I'm being a little bit over the top about budgeting, what I'm hoping that you'll get out of all of this is that it gets you a little bit excited about budgets, and you can see what they can do for your nonprofit. All right. So nonprofit budget is generally split into 4 categories. You have your general and administrative costs, or what I like to call your have-to-haves, because these are things that you have to keep your doors open and operating. Next are your program and your project costs. So things that help you run your programs and your projects, or like what I like to call your like-to-haves, because these are those things that you would like to do and that you'd like to have. Next are your fundraising costs, or your quote-unquote need-to-haves, because these are the things that you need to have to fundraise successfully, right? So then lastly, you have your revenue, which is what I call you gotta have, because this is the money that you gotta have to fund your costs, okay? So coincidentally, this is also the order in which Susan and I recommend that you begin tackling the budget process, because the budget process, it can be overwhelming and it is time consuming. But if you start to break it down into smaller steps, honestly, it becomes a whole lot more manageable for you, okay? Wait for it. Wait for it. I promise there's a next slide. Well, there it is. Okay, so it's important to understand that costs are considered fixed or variable. Okay, so without digging into the weeds too much, we just kind of wanted to go over this. So what do I mean by the fixed variable? Well, fixed costs are more static costs, or ones that remain the same throughout the year, and they generally need to be funded no matter what. So I've thrown up a few examples here. So rent and lease payments, occupancy, Utilities like your water and your electric, maybe your internet. Taxes and insurance, so things like legal fees, your charitable solicitations permit if your state requires one. Contractual services, which typically are going to be third-party services. So if you're paying somebody to do your accounting, a third-party service, if you get an audit done each year, payroll services, ADP, and then also technology. So for instance, your website maintenance, you have that up and running, you have to have that up and running, so you pay your maintenance costs. So fixed costs can actually make your budgeting a lot easier because you likely already know what they're going to be. And because they remain the same, it's easier to know how much you'll spend on them each month. So variable costs are costs that usually change, whether it's year to year or month to month. But variable costs can possibly be adjusted with program change or substitution. So a few examples here. The first one, the startup / one-time initial costs. I want to take a moment here to look at this because it's important that you differentiate between startup and one-time initial costs and quote-unquote regular costs when you're budgeting. And so I'm going to give you an example. Back in 2012, I was helping a nonprofit plan an urban garden. As part of that, they wanted to build a greenhouse and then use the greenhouse to grow starts from seeds that they could then transplant to the garden when they were ready. So we had to include in that year's organizational budget costs like architects to design the greenhouse, the building materials, lighting, and even like the irrigation system that goes throughout there. So the time came, we built it, the urban garden program took off, and there it was. So then the next year, when we were doing the 2013 organizational budget, we made sure that we didn't include the same costs that we did in that startup, but we only planned instead for the ongoing and maintenance costs of the greenhouse. So things like seeds, seed trays, the water bill, right? Because we have to have water running through that thing, and planting soil. Okay, so it's important for you to know the difference between all of those. The salaries and benefits, those are variable costs. Other things like postage, mileage, conferences, of course, being sure to budget for things like flight and hotel, even the food or the meals and the ground transportation, and even something like volunteer appreciation. You can budget that into your organizational budget to provide, some fun and some recognition for your volunteers. So variable costs can make budgeting a little bit more difficult because you have to think about the work you're doing, the work that you're going to do at your nonprofit for the year, and estimate the cost based on that line of thinking. If you're a type of nonprofit who's budgeted in previous years, sometimes you can look at what you spent last year and figure out whether you'll use more or less this year. If you haven't budgeted before, or you're looking at purchasing new things, sometimes, of course, you may have to go and get quotes from vendors to figure out what that cost might be. You may even need to figure out the stores that you'll buy the stuff from and how much they price things. And who knows, maybe Amazon even has it a little bit cheaper, right? So now it's time to get into the budgeting and into each of our three main categories, okay? So as you go through this, you will see where we have to keep in mind costs that are fixed and costs that are variable. So we recommend starting out with the general and administrative costs because these are things you, as I said earlier, have to operate. You may have heard the terms direct and indirect costs. So direct costs are those costs that directly support your programming. Things like program salaries and program supplies. On the other hand, indirect costs support your nonprofit, but are not directly tied to programming. Right, so keep that in mind whenever you see that we'll mention throughout the slides, things that are indirect and direct. So generally, most of your general and administrative costs are going to be indirect costs. So these are the ones that nonprofits tend to struggle to get funded from things like grants, but having something like a monthly giving program is where money comes for things like this. So in the budgeting process, you have to sit down and you have to determine both your fixed and your variable costs for your general administrative costs. Okay, so things like, for instance, rent, as you see here on the screen. Rent is an indirect but fixed cost. So $1,000 per month for 12 months, $120,000. You know how much you're going to be paying. Conferences, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit variable because you have to plan for the actual flight and hotel. You have to figure out costs for your ground transportation, your meals, those type of things. And you might go to multiple conferences in 1 year. You might go to 2 different conferences. Okay.
Hey, Leah,
So,
Monique has a good question.
Sure.
She's asking, why are salaries variable? Don't you need to pay your staff monthly, and aren't the salaries fixed? So do you want to address that?
Yep, very good question, Monique. So salaries are variable because they can fluctuate from year to year. So I guess you could say in one way, it's fixed for that year. However, you have to take into consideration, for instance, you might give an employee a raise that year. So if in doing that, sure, it can be considered fixed, but chances are it's variable because it's going to change from year to year. So that's the easiest way to answer that one. Okay. And so I'm throwing up here on the screen a copy, or an example, of a general administrative budget from one of our clients. So it's super simple. You can see they've listed on here their bank charges, merchants fees, things like gifts and promos, meals. As you see, they didn't list anything in there. And so it makes you wonder, why not? Maybe this is an organization who doesn't go places and provide money for meals. Maybe it's in their fundraising budget, maybe it's in the program budgets, office supplies, postage. So all those things that are very general to the organization that help you support the work of your nonprofit, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it back over to Susan, and she'll go over the next few categories for us.
Okay, so program and project costs. These are your direct costs. These are the things that you've got to do and to have in order to move forward with your program and carry out what your goals are. These can be both fixed and variable. Sometimes you have to think, well, all the time, really. As I mentioned earlier, again, you have to think about the details. And I think these are 2 good examples here on this slide. The 20 shovels at $12 each, I mean, that would pertain probably to, a Habitat for Humanity organization, or maybe that's a grand opening shovel thing where you're, digging the first hose for your building that you're building. But anyway, you've got to have that. And the thing about it is, those are going to cost $12 a piece. So, you've researched that, you've looked that up at Home Depot or something, and you know that. So it's a really simple one. And
Susan? Oh.
Going back to the salary question, I have to spend time on that particular program. So say 75% of the $30,000 salary is $22,500. That is how much that program is going to cost in your program time. And then, of course, that is also one of those things that it can be administrative, or it can be a program. I'll just think about, I have one that I work for, an organization that their executive director has some of her time on programs specifically. So when we do grants, we will pull out a percentage of her salary for a program, and so she's not just administrative, she's also program. So we go to the next slide.
Working on it. Sorry,
okay.
Hang tight. Okay.
Okay, great. This is a good program budget. This is a supported employment program. This is a program that an organization does for people who are developmentally or intellectually challenged, and they want to go out in the community and work. So this organization provides this program where they have employment specialists or job coaches that actually help them interview and apply for jobs, and They go out and actually work with them on the job and help them until they can kind of get it underhand. And this is their program budget. So they have got all these employment specialist salaries in their program budget. They have an assistant director for that program. That's 45,000. They've included the payroll taxes and the medical coverage for those employees because they're directly related to this program. They have the office supplies just for that program. And again, they actually transport these individuals to their jobs, so they have to put their gas and vehicle maintenance into their budget. And then the rest of this is the technology that they need. So they, have iPads that they use to help them do resumes and apply for jobs, and they use it for tracking and teaching them on the job. So they've got a budget here. It's a program budget of 316,202, and that is what they know that they're going to have to spend to carry out this program. The next one, Leah.
I'm doing it. Hang on. I promise. I'm hitting the button. There we go.
Okay, great. This is a mobile medical clinic that had a client that was doing this in Haiti, and this was a specific project. Now we calling it a project because it's not a regular program that they do. It is a project they wanted to go out and accomplish that year of setting up this mobile medical clinic. And you can see here that the good thing about this one I want you to notice is the descriptions. So they have, the translators, for instance, the second line there. They know they're going to have 5 translators for 5 days, and it's going to cost them $40 per day. So they know exactly what it's going to cost them to do that. Another good one, transportation, they're renting vehicles for this. So they're going to have to rent 4 vehicles for 5 days at $150 per vehicle. So they know exactly what that's going to take. They've got their meals in here. They've got the medicines. As a part of this, you'll notice there's says attached list of medicines and supplies list. So they had accompanying this project budget, they also had a list of all those things and exactly how much they cost. So they knew exactly what they were going into when they were deciding to do this project. So these two give you a good examples of how someone sits down and actually thinks about how they're going to carry out their program and their project and what it's going to take to be able to accomplish that, and the detail that really is so critical to making sure that that you have what you need and that you're budgeting and that your revenue is going to line up with being able to handle these things. And I hear Leah clicking again. Yay. Okay. Okay. Fundraising costs. I love this one because a lot of people don't think about this, which is kind of odd, really, if you think about it, because a lot of people think about what they're going to raise and they don't think about what's going to cost them to do it. And this gets into that return on investment. If you're doing a fundraising activity and you really look at what it's going to take to carry that activity out, and you look at how much you're going to raise from it, and that includes staff time too, by the way, how much staff time it's going to take and volunteers to pull that off. Is it worth it to you? Is the return on investment, 3 to 1's good. Like for every dollar you spend, you're making $3. That's a good investment to look at. So these are indirect costs because they are considered things that are not related to program, but they are things that you have to have in order to have your programs. So examples of things you need to look at with fundraising costs or events. And again, I'll say that always think about special events, about your return on investment. Appeals, what's it going to take to do a direct mail appeal? Postage, printing, buying envelopes. What is all that going to cost exactly? How many are you going to send? Who are you going to send them to? And so that you know exactly how much it's going to cost and what you're hoping to raise from that. Social media advertising, is that going to cost? Again, here's donor appreciation. You could consider that a fundraising cost. You may pay a grant writer, and that needs to be included in your fundraising costs. Here's a couple of examples of something that might be in a fundraising cost. So this food would be something probably in an event. So you know you're going to have 50 meals, and that they're going to cost $10 a piece. So you know that's $500. A location rental that's going to cost you $500 a day. So you've probably either called them and found out that it's going to cost that much, or you've done some research about different places you can have it and get it within what you can afford. And we put donated in parentheses because so often nonprofits can get that donated. And later when we get into in-kind, we'll talk a little bit more about how you can include those in-kind and donated things in your budget. So this is a great example of a fundraising budget. This is not what they're making from their fundraising. This is their list of fundraising activities. This is one of my favorite organizations. It's a group out in California that does animal welfare. And these are the things they've listed of what they're going to do and what it's going to cost them to do it. And they've got a mailer at $500. And if you look, what's great about this one also is they have broken it down by quarter. So they know what they're going to be spending by quarter. So they also know cash flow reasons, what they're going to have available in each quarter to spend, or what they need to be able to spend in each quarter to make these things happen. And it's kind of also like a calendar, like a fundraising calendar. It can also be looked at like that. One of the things I'll point out here, they have at the very bottom there, you'll see their Kindful CRM software support. So some people may see that as a administrative cost, and it is, but I think that it's important for people that's a fundraising cost, putting your software in there. So you have to consider that when you're deciding how much you're going to spend raising money. So this is a great example, and it's very well thought out. And I can tell you that when he developed this budget, that he was basing it on prior year expenses, or he was basing it on experience other organizations have had, or he's done real specific research into what it would cost him to do. Like Turkey Trot is a 5K run they participate in, and that is the fees for them to be able to participate. So, and t-shirts, I believe, is part of that. So those are all very well thought out programs. So I'll turn it back over, and Leah will talk some more about revenue.
All right, guys. Hopefully y'all are still with us. I know we're throwing a lot at you about the expenses. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there. No question is a stupid question. I wish I had something like what you guys are learning whenever I first started nonprofit world, because I used to be in corporate world. I was in a nonprofit retail. What am I saying? Retail management. And then I went over to the nonprofit world, which is completely different, of course. And there was so much I really didn't know about how a nonprofit worked. And if I'd had something like this to help me understand it, would have been so much easier for my learning curve as I came through and started doing my grant writing. So at this point, we've gone through our general administrative costs. We've gone through our program and project costs, and we've gone through our fundraising costs. So the last-ish step in the budgeting process is now to turn your eye over to your revenue, all right? So the first thing that you'll want to look at when you sit down to do this is what you have, or what you can rely on to have or have access to, things that are confirmed or committed for you. So for instance, a monthly giving program allows you to know how much money you're going to be receiving from a specific donor each month. So you can go ahead and throw that in there in your budget as an anticipated revenue amount. You might also have maybe a monthly pledge, or a monthly pledge. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. A multi-year pledge from a donor. So let's say a donor said, hey, I'll give you $1,000 a year for 3 years. You know you can expect to get that this year and the next year, perhaps. So you can throw that in there as well. Also, in-kind commitments. If somebody is allowing you to rent space from them for free, That's going to be one of your in-kind. Once you've figured all that out, then you'll have to begin estimating what you think will come in. So this is where the fun begins with your estimation. So you have to look at things like your program fees. So if you've gone through and set your goals, your programmatic goals, and you know how many people you're going to be serving or what it is that you're going to be doing, you can estimate how much this amount can be. So for instance, if you're in animal welfare, if you think, okay, we're going to adopt out about 400 animals this year, and you kind of know about how many animals or how many dogs and how many cats, and you know what your adoption fees are for each of those, then you can go ahead and estimate out how much your adoption fees are going to bring in for you guys for the year. Also, same thing if you have membership. You know what your member fees are, you can guess that as well. Difference between your program fees and your program incomes. Program fees are what you charge others to kind of be a part of your crew, if you will, so, or like your adoption fees. Whereas your program income is the money you're making from things or services that you sell. That's one way of kind of looking at it. So for instance, when I was with Habitat back in Nashville, their restores sell the furniture and they sell the plates and the bowls and the home goods and all that stuff. So the sales that they make from those are then turned into program income. Same thing whenever I was at another organization, Hands on Nashville, in Nashville, we were actually volunteer resource agency. And we did a lot of consulting with nonprofits about how to have very strong volunteer management programs. And so we had webinars and we did workshops, and we were able to charge registration fees for those. And so that was program income for us. Also, you'll need to figure out grants for the year. So if you've been getting grants, then what I'm going to recommend is that you're very modest with how much you put into your budget. So if you know you've been getting about $10,000 a year, you might want to just go a little bit lower than that, maybe say like $5,000 to $8,000, just to be super modest, conservative, in case you don't get those grants, because as we know, grants can be unreliable. If you've never budgeted for grants before, here's my honest advice, and this is what Susan agrees with also: don't budget for grants. Because as we've said, grants are very unreliable, and if you've never written grants before, that first year, you may not get any grants. And so if you put $5,000 in your budget for grants and you don't get that, then you're gonna have to be making up for that somewhere else. So I say just don't budget for grants. And if you get some, great, celebrate, add that into your revenue. Contributions or donations and events, of course. So for these last few, your grants and your donations and your events, this is where having a fundraising plan comes in handy. And if you've listened to Sandy, she all the time talks about her 110, 1000, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, when we get off the webinar, go find that, because it's going to be a wealth of information for you about how many grants and events and donors that you should have in your fundraising plan. Okay, so you need to have a plan for this stuff, and so you're not pulling numbers out of thin air for your revenue.
Because that's exciting and a lot of fun, right? So
yes,
a couple of questions that have come in. Anne is asking, do grant funders expect to see a section for grant revenue in your budget?
If you receive grants, then yes, you can put that in there. They don't necessarily expect to see it unless you are having, if you do grants usually. Susan, do you have anything else to add to that? Because that may not have made the most sense.
Yeah, if I'm applying for a grant, and I would have a grant revenue line, and I would put that organization that I'm applying to, I'd put their name, and I would put the amount I'm requesting, and I would put pending in parentheses, and then any other grants that I would be applying for, I would list those as well, so that they know they're not the only one I'm asking for the funding from. And then, of course, if you have any that you've secured for that, then you would list those, put the amount, and put secured by that. So, and that is really important when you're applying for a grant, because so many of them, they don't want to be the only one funding things. And it shows some sustainability, of course, if you have other funders. So, yeah, if you're applying for a grant, you have to think about that. But I think what Leah's talking about is, organizational budget. If you don't have any grants in the past and it's your first year, you're probably unlikely to have that. So a program budget for a grant is going to be a little different than what you would have on your organizational budget. Does that help?
Good
Very
question.
good. Yeah, I think maybe for Annie and for probably some other people whose organizations are just really young or new, it's okay if you don't have any revenue on that grant line item. That's okay. And if there's ever a question, you can always explain it to the foundation that, well, you're new at grants, you just don't have any grant revenue to share yet. One other question from Candace. She says, when applying for grants, would you only put the amount that corresponds to the percent of time spent directly on the program? In other words, for direct cost. I think I think she may be talking about salaries. So when you're applying for a grant, you would only put the amount that corresponds to the percent of time that person spends on that program in that program's budget.
Correct.
And I'm going to say yes as well. I think that you're right on it, Candace.
Yes. So if you do have a program manager, you like to think that 100%, for instance, of your program manager's time is spent in that program. People can make arguments that maybe it's about like 95%, because there could be 5% of that person's time that's spent in staff meetings or attending organizational related type things. So you could put, 95% of this program manager's salary into that program.
And that's how you start to get salaries paid for with grants. That's exactly how it's done. Okay, one more question. This one's from Monique. Monique, I appreciate so much that you just show up so consistently and ask questions. Thank you.
She does.
She is like, we love you. Okay, so Monique says, just want to verify that organizational budgets and program budgets should be separate.
Good question. They are one and the same. And if you hang on with us just a little while, you will see a breakout of all of this, and it might help make more sense. But to answer the question, the program budget is part of the organizational budget. It's almost like if an organizational budget is equal to the general admin plus your programs plus your fundraising. Okay, so yeah, just hang on with me just a little while longer and we'll show you an example.
Yep. And then the nice thing about having those separate ones is if you are applying for a grant for a specific program, you've got the program budget to show them so that they know exactly what it costs you to run that program and where their money fits in.
Exactly.
All right.
So real quick, I won't spend too much time on this, but the revenue budget here, I wanted to point out just a couple fun things on this. So if you see where it says this is a substance abuse treatment center. And so if you see where they have business ventures, that's an example of their program income that they have. So they actually budget for that. And also, I really like this one. If you look at the fourth line down, it says directors' donations. That is their board of directors' donations, right? So they actually put this into their organizational budget as a line item that shows that their board of directors will donate $18,000. So can you imagine being on the board of directors and saying, oh my gosh, each month you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, you guys, we're not making our budget. We need to make our budget. So it really puts the accountability on them. So I just wanted to show, I like that one. I wanted to show you guys. You don't have to do that, but I just thought it was really fun that this organization chooses to do that. So your organizational budget, again, or your revenue budget as part of your organizational budget. So at this point, you've got all of your expenses figured out. You've got your revenue figured out. And at this moment, it's like one of those drum roll moments where you're sitting there going, okay, and the answer is, do we have enough money to cover our expenses? Yes or no? If you do, congratulations, right? Yay! So you now have the money that you need to make the dream for your year happen. And you might even have a little bit more revenue left over that allows you maybe to put some money in a savings account or plan for a program that you maybe wanted to save up for. And I know Sandy shared with me this example from a group, was it Crazy Cabbies Guinea Pig Rescue? So of course Crazy Cabbies, yeah. So they adopt out, rescued guinea pigs. And so they're planning for a retail location that would sell supplies, your bedding and all that stuff for your guinea pigs. And then also it would serve as an adoption center. And so because they budgeted so well the few years prior to that, and they made sure that they had more revenue than expenses. They were actually able to save up for 1 year's worth of expenses in the bank for them to open that center whenever they were ready. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing that they did. They just saved up for it. Now they have it. Now they can go ahead and open it up, and they're not trying to struggle and rush out there and try and get the money raised for that. If you go through this whole process and you find that your expenses are more than your revenue, that's okay, because that happens a lot of times. People go in with all these big dreams, and then they realize, oh no, it's not really completely feasible for us to raise all that money that we need to this year. So this whole process is like a balancing act, as you'll see on this little picture on the screen. And sometimes you have to go back and forth until you get the numbers right. So you want to start working toward either what they call a balanced budget, so where you have the same amount of revenue as you do expenses, or you try and work toward where you have a little bit of a surplus, or where you have more revenue than expenses. You know, for example, if you're a habitat, and I'm sorry I keep going back to habitat, but that's the one that's on my mind. You know, if you go through this whole process and you did this based on building 3 houses, and you realize we just have too many expenses than the money we can bring in, perhaps you go back and you say, okay, what does this budget look like if we go down to 2 houses? And then you go back and you redo all of your expenses for just the 2 houses and see if that comes out a little bit better. So we don't want to discourage you from dreaming big, but you do need to find a healthy balance between what you want to accomplish and what it is that you can do realistically with the funds that you can feasibly bring in, okay? So we're gonna navigate away from this for a moment, just so I can show you some of these examples of these organizational budgets. And hopefully you can still see my screen. Sandy, we all good?
You are good, Houston.
Excellent.
Fire when ready.
All right. So this is an example of a animal welfare organization, one of my clients, that has, they're really detailed with their budgets. And as you can see here, you know, they have all their income budgeted for the year. They actually have a client program, a clinic, a veterinary clinic. And they also run a shelter. So this is a good example of showing you a template that they use for when you're doing your program budgeting. So I'm going to scroll down through here a little bit. We'll get to the expenses. And you can see they have their animal care expenses detailed out, so they know how much they're going to need in food and cat litter and their general animal supplies, which is probably paper towels and things like that. In their clinic, they know all their medical expenses, so their oxygen, the prescription food that they have to get, you know, cremation costs in the unfortunate event that they have to euthanize, mobile diagnostics for taking their vet services somewhere else. So I want to show you this example, and I'm going to show you another example of one. So this is another organizational budget that a finance director has created that's a little bit more detailed with the whole projecting out. So they can see January through December how much money that they're going to be bringing in. And then they can also see January through December how many expenses that they're going to be incurring.
And I want to just on that one too, I wanted to point out, if you can go back to that just for a second. I showed you that medical clinic budget earlier, and you'll see in this is the organizational budget, and they have a line item for that medical clinic. So there's a sidebar program budget that they use to come up with this number on the organizational budget, which kind of goes back to answering that question earlier, is how, you know, is a program budget separate? No, it's part of your organizational budget, but this shows how it's only a line item in the organizational budget, but they know that they have a program budget that helped them decide what to put in this organizational budget.
Mm-hmm. I've got another example. This is one you guys have probably seen where they projected out quarterly. This one's got all of their program costs listed. So they have various programs. So here they've got a puppy foster program. They have an adult dog foster program. They have a kitten foster program. They have a medical program. They have a volunteer program. So they've got all their expenses divvied out that way. But then you come down here and they have their fundraising costs, which we saw earlier, and the admin costs, which we saw earlier. So this is, again, just another example of a way that you can do it. So if anything, you could take away from this that there's really no generally accepted format or template that you need to use for a budget. That being said, I love supplying people with stuff. So this is where your handouts come into play. I've provided you with 2 handouts there. There's one that looks a little bit more simplistic. That's called Organizational Fiscal Year Budget Planning. Actually, I think they're both called that. But one of them just shows very simple revenue at the top, and I've listed a few down the side just as examples. And then also there's expenses with a few of those listed down through here. And these are expenses that are generally applicable to most nonprofits. And so feel free to use these as you guys are sitting down to do your own planning. If you get the Excel version, you can go in and make whatever changes to it that you need. So let's say you don't do grants, you can go in and easily remove your grant line. Okay, so there's that one. Oh, and then so at the bottom of this one, you'll see where hopefully you'll have some net revenue. Now, Monique, you were asking earlier about the program budget being different from the organizational budget, and this is what I was referring to. So if you can see here, this is separated from top to bottom with your revenue on top, your expenses on the bottom. But then I've went in and I've added these sections for you to where you can go in. So your general and administrative costs, you can account for these separately from your program costs and then also from your fundraising costs. So if you're really, really super great with Excel, you can come in and manipulate the daylights out of this. If you have more than one program, you can come in and add as many different programs in here as you want, where you can, again, you can budget for everything. I have gone in and put in a few different examples just so you guys can see. So the executive director, maybe 80% of his or her time is being spent doing general nonprofit stuff. So we put in 80% of their time in general administration, but perhaps he or she spends about 5% of time working on this one program. So you could put 5% in there. But yet, even more than that, maybe this person goes out and does a lot of fundraising as well. So 15% of his or her time is being spent doing that. So you can throw some money in there. So you're building each of your budgets out for for these different sections. And you can go in.
Hang on a second, Leah, because Phyllis had a question about that, about how do you get grants for salaries? This is the first step. You got to figure out, and you can lay it out this way. And like Leah said, you can add additional columns for all your programs, but then you start figuring out what % of each staff person's time is spent in that program. And then it gets included in the program budget. So then, like in this example where you have program 1, Phyllis, in your case, if that was day services and you had everybody who spent any time with the percentage of their time in the day services budget, then when you go get grants for day services, it will pay for that percentage of staff time. That's how you start to get salaries covered. You're going to find and this is for everybody, you're going to find very few opportunities where you have a grant that will just flat out pay for salaries. You have to include it this way in order to get those covered. Hopefully that makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, you can go in and you can manipulate the daylights out of this, like I was saying. So while in one form employee benefits was just one row, for instance here, employee benefits, in this larger spreadsheet, you can go in and actually split that up, and you can budget for FICA, you can budget for the workers' comp, you can budget for healthcare, whatever benefits that you offer your employees per employee. Okay, so I'm going to get off my geeky Excel soapbox, but if you guys are interested in learning more about this, let us know, because Susan and I could always probably do like a bonus webinar for you guys that would take us maybe a step further on budgets. So with that said, we're going to go back into this PowerPoint, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan so she can quickly talk to us about how to budget in kind.
Okay, this is something that's really important to consider when you're doing your budget, especially for nonprofits that are new and young, because perhaps a lot of your support is coming from in kind. One of the budgets we've shown you often is the one out in California that we showed their breakdown, and they don't have any paid staff. So all their work is done by actually volunteers. So so a couple of things that you can look at with in-kind is what, products that are given to you, such as, we always seem to come back to animal welfare, but perhaps you have a company that donated litter or food. Services may be things like maybe even accounting, or a professional that's donating vet services, or an attorney, those kinds of things. And these are just a couple, we've put on here a couple of spots to show you where you can get information to do that. The independent sector is a place that is standard used by grant writers and is accepted by funders as a calculation of the value of volunteer time. Right now, I believe it is about $24.
$24.69.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The value of a volunteer. So if a volunteer spends 10 hours on something, you can multiply that by $24.69 and you get the value of that volunteer's time. The other way that you can do that is by using the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this Occupational Outlook Handbook, and you can actually look up an occupation of a service that someone is providing you and look at what the standard pay is for them and use that to calculate it. This is just real quickly an example of a budget that was done this way. And this one was really important to do this way because this was a brand new nonprofit. They didn't have much of a budget to use, but they had to have one to do grants. So when I took them on, they didn't even have an organizational budget. But like I said, we had to have one for grants. So this was how I actually developed the organizational budget for them. And if you look at the yellow under the revenue, it's got in-kind. So we had volunteer general labor. They did a $10 an hour rather than using independent sector, which, that's the prerogative of the organization. Independent sector gives you something that you can use that's industry accepted. Professional volunteers, they did $50 per hour. They also had office space and other utilities that were donated, so they had a value for that. So out of their $65,000 revenue, they had $15,000 in an in-kind. And if you look down in operating, you have to put that in operating as well to balance your budget out. So those same things are put under expenses so that it shows, that you have a balance between the two. So this is a great way for a new or a volunteer-run organization to include, what does it really cost for your organization to operate? So if they had not have put these things in there, a funder's going to go, well, who's making all this happen? Where are you operating from? Well, when they see these in-kind, then that question gets answered. So, and I was able to get several grants from them, for them from using that organizational budget. So, and that's another topic that we can talk about more over time.
All right.
Anyway, I'll let you have it back, Leah.
Thank you, Susan.
Thing.
All right. So we have just a few minutes left, and real quickly, I just wanted to mention, that it's super important that you track your nonprofit's revenues and expenses, because doing so is going to help you understand how you're doing financially, and whether you have enough money to sustain your operations, and whether donations need to be increased or expenses need to be decreased. So you can track your expenses on this through spreadsheets. However, generally it's preferred that you do it through your accounting system, because your accounting system allows you to keep information accurate, and it also spits out reports, so things like budget to actuals. So a report like that allows you to look at what you budgeted for the month and then see what you are actually spending toward that and how you're doing. You can also cash flow things, so you can project money that's going to be coming in and out for each month. And so that allow you to understand if you're going to have enough money coming up. So let's say a main donor usually sends you a big check in January, and that supports a large portion of your spending. And so you just need to make sure that that money's there before you go spending anything. And then, of course, any type of analysis that can help you understand your budget more and identify any changes over the years. And you can also share the organizational budget as a tool with your constituents as well. So lots of information that we went over, and we're like out of time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sandy. And thank you guys. If you have questions, tag us on the Facebook group, and we'll be sure to get with you. Thank you.
All right, so
Thank you.
I tell you what, you guys, if you want to hang around just for a minute, we do have several questions. We can, for those of you who have someplace else to be, we are officially complete. But for those of you who've asked some questions, hang on, and we'll answer a couple of those, and then we'll put our heads together and figure out what would be a good next step of another webinar for you. So let's start with a question from Joey Cecilia, and I think this is going to be a good one. And Leah alluded to this right at the end, and that is basically their organization is brand new. How in the world do they figure out how to budget in the future when they don't really have any historical numbers to work with?
Susan, would you mind doing this? Because you do it so eloquently.
Well, you know, and of course, that's one of the situations where you're going to have to do some guesswork. You know, when you talk about your revenue, your expenses, and you know, I'm not sure what organization you have, but you know, that's where you do a little research. You know, how much are the is an item going to cost that you need to carry out your program, and you're going to have to go look and find out how much that costs, and that's where Google comes in great. You know, I do a lot of grant budgets using Amazon. If they want to buy a computer or they want to buy you know, supplies of any kind, office supplies, whatever that is, you know, you go look at your vendor and you figure that out. The other thing on the revenue, you know, that's a lot of guesswork, and that's where having your fundraising plan is so critical. And Sandy spends a lot of time on fundraising plans because of that. So when you're building your fundraising plan, you can use, you know, other organizations' experience, you know, our experience from raising money of, you know, how much you can expect when you do a direct mail appeal. You're going to look at you know, how many people you're sending a letter to, and then what is the standard return. It's probably like 1% the first time. So, you know, and then you build on that. So you've really got to find ways to tap into other people's experience when you do revenue. And, you know, if you're going to do programs that have fees, then you're going to know how much you're going to charge for somebody to do something before they do it. You are going to have to guess about how many you're going to serve. So, you know, be conservative when you're determining those things. That's why Leah said, you know, don't budget for grants the first year, because it's very difficult to get grants the very first year you operate. So my best thing with expenses is look for examples, look it up, look for vendors, find other organizations that have done what you do, and see what their budgets look like. Network with people.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Susan.
To see what things cost and what experience. Yeah. Hello?
Yep, I think you're back. Awesome. Well, we've had some interesting tech challenges today.
Not sure the last thing I said. What was the last thing I said?
I'm sure it was brilliant. So I think the long and short of when you don't have any historical data to go off of is you want to be really careful and very conservative. Use what you've got to work with. Look at other organizations that are similar and just make your best guess. We've all been there. We've all done that. And that's about all you can do. And then the next year, at least you've got some numbers to work with. Although in year 2, or if you're in a growing year, it can be equally difficult because you're not really sure how things are going to work out as you attempt to implement new things. You know, what I'm thinking about is, let's say you come up with an idea for a brand new fundraiser. You're super excited about it, but that's really hard to budget because you don't know. You'd like for it to bring in $10,000, but you don't know until you do it once what it's actually going to be. Monique is saying that one of the examples there was, let's see, the in-kind revenue was not also reflected under expenses. That was probably an oversight on our part. Way to go, Eagle Eye. Because it should. Anytime you include in-kind, there should be in both in revenue and expenses.
Oh, it was in the example. It was in highlighted at the top and highlighted at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. If you take a look, go look back and look at that, you'll see it.
Yeah. Okay, Candace has another question. Where does the number come from when nonprofits have on their website that they spend, let's say, 86% of donations directly supporting a program? Are they using the budget to get that number, or where's that coming from?
Okay, so how can I explain this without stumbling all over myself? Whenever you do your 990s, so you do your tax returns for the year, if you look at your 990, your expenses that you report out are separated into your general and administrative costs, into your fundraising costs, and into your program costs. So like I said earlier, the program costs are viewed as your direct costs. So these are the dollars that funders see that are specifically going toward the work your organization does. So to get to that number, you would take what percentage your fundraising and your general and administrative costs are. So let's say they total 14% of 100% of your organizational costs. That means then that your program costs are the other 86% of your 100% of your organizational costs. So 14% is indirect cost, 86% is direct cost. If you look at that from a dollar perspective, that means for every dollar somebody gives you, 86 cents of that is going directly toward your programming. Period.
And I think it's real important here too that's whenever it comes into, so it's so important about taking salaries and looking at the program that those people are working on, because their time shouldn't just go into administrative. It needs to go into those program costs. So you don't want to put all your salaries as administrative when those people are doing programs, because then you're going to end up with a big high administrative, and that's where dividing those percentages up with your salaries is so important about your program.
Right. So essentially, the higher percentage that your program expenses are to your entire organizational budget, the higher that number is, the more of a what am I trying to say? So the higher that is, the better, I guess you could say, in the eyes of, let's say, a donor, because they see that, like I said, is 86 cents for every dollar is going directly toward programming, or directly toward what it is that you guys do.
Yep, spot on. And Joey had a similar question. Joey's heard that donors like to support organizations if the administrative costs are anywhere from 10 to 12% of the income. And I think Leah just said that. Usually, the rule of thumb that I remember is anything that was 20% or less. So if your fundraising and administrative costs are 20% or less of your overall budget, you're okay. The lower it gets, the better, because donors want to see every bit possible of their donation going to programs. And you guys have seen this. You've seen the horror stories of organizations that we find out that 95 cents out of every dollar is going into the director's pocket. And none of us feel good about that. It actually gives every charity a black eye when that happens. So this is one way that you can handle that, is when you're managing your budget, you're looking at your numbers, you're making sure that you're spending more money on programs than you are on administration, and I'm not saying you can't pay people well. You can pay people well, but it has to be a reasonable percent of the overall expenses. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so it looks like that's all of our questions for right now. Leah's put one more slide up. You guys, we have a lot of different grant services. If anybody's interested, if you just need a little help putting a budget together, Of course, you can always throw a budget into the Facebook group and tag one of us, and we'll be happy to look at it for you. Or if you've got specific questions, you can ask those there. We will have a quarterly Q&A call. You can ask questions about a specific budget there. Or if you want us to give you a hand with a budget for purposes of submitting a grant, we've got a lot of different ways we can do that. If you're interested, you can shoot us an email at support@getfullyfunded.com, and we can talk to you about what those are and how we can support you. All right, so it looks like that was all of our questions for today. And I'm sure for all of you who are listening, after this sinks in a little bit, you're going to have more. Just remember, the Facebook group is always open, so you can go and ask a question, tag one of us. We'll come along and give you a hand with that. Thank you so much for being here. Leah and Susan, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I know you guys put a lot of work into pulling this information together and the handouts and the examples, so thank you. I want to thank all of you, because I know everybody has other places that they could be today, and you've chosen to spend this time with us. I know we appreciate that very much. So that's it for today. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you guys back here again next time. Bye, everybody.